Last summer, I went to the Ukraine, and there's another woman here who was at the Ukraine the same time I was, that I was just talking to. And I went to the shtetl, a small village of my mother's family, and the town of my father's family, and confronted the life that could have been mine. As I walked the streets with my guide and went to the forest, to the very spot where the Nazis killed all the Jews in that village, Subulivka, my mother's village, and met a man who had been a slave laborer during the Holocaust when he was 12 years old, I realized how lucky I was that my widowed grandmother had guts enough to run from the Bolsheviks with 4 of her 5 children during the Russian Revolution, even though she had to leave her oldest child behind. My book's title is a piece of her heart because it's about a mother and daughter separated for a lifetime. A piece of each one's heart was missing. Incredibly, my Soviet aunt found us, her American family, in 1965. How she found our address is a mystery. We had all moved several times in the years of America. They came to America in 1923. They arrived, so they left in 1921 or 1920. In that letter, written 45 years after she said goodbye to her family, she wrote that if her mother was still alive, she wanted to come to America to see her once more before she died. Well, now I'm going to read some of the first chapter to you. On a warm summer evening in 1965, my grandmother, Malka, sat on a lawn chair in the middle of her Philadelphia street in a neighborhood called Feltonville, near Logan, waiting for the daughter she had not seen in all those years. My widowed Bubba, and for those of you who don't know, Bubba is grandmother in both Yiddish and a lot of the Ukrainian Russian area. It's babushka. My Bubba fled the Russian Revolution with 4 of her 5 children, as I've already said. Freda was 18, married, and had a baby boy when the family left. A crying infant could give them all away as they crossed borders without papers in the middle of the Russian Revolution. Besides, her husband didn't want to leave his family. All the years of my childhood, every time I walked into my grandmother's house, my eyes went to the only photo of the lost family we had. A sad, solemn family. A little girl, about 2 years old, her brother, maybe 5, and the young parents. Only there, in my grandmother's dining room display, were they part of our family. Nobody ever talked about them. I always knew who they were. The last time we heard from our Russian family was in 1936, when my aunt's son, the same son whose birth had kept her from leaving her family, told her, "Mama, we have to stop getting mail from America. Someone will report us," because that's the way they lived in the Soviet Union. She knew he was right. She stopped writing. They had long ago left the shtetl in the Ukraine and lived in Tashkent in Uzbekistan, but we didn't know that. As new immigrants, and I was a child, a very little child, as new immigrants to America, our parents were too busy struggling to build an American life and later to survive the Depression to pay attention to those letters from Russia or to notice when the letters stopped. I think they believed that she and her family were dead, killed by Stalin and the Nazis. They also may have felt some guilt because they were safe in America and she was not. Only in the photo in my Bubba's dining room was that Russian family real to us. And then that incredible letter came. I mean, she was alive. It was years before the Soviet Jewry movement, years before we in America saw even a few Soviet Jewish people here. We were still using the term the Iron Curtain. In the letter, written in Yiddish, my aunt told us that her son, that little boy in the photo, was a doctor, a gynecologist. Her daughter, the 2-year-old in the photo, was a pediatrician. She never told us about the years she and her husband spent in Siberia. That we would learn when she was here with us. I remember my father reading that first letter out loud in Yiddish to the whole family. If my mother is still alive, she wrote, I want to come to America to embrace her once more before she dies. I will never forget the emotional moment when my Aunt Freda jumped out of the moving car that had brought her from Kennedy Airport and ran toward her mother crying, Mama, Mama, and my ancient Bubba leaped out of her lawn chair where she had been waiting for hours and ran toward her daughter at the other end of the street. My aunt stayed with us for 6 months. It was an amazing 6 months, and I don't have the time to tell you all of it, but it's all in my book. And then she returned to her family in Tashkent. She had children and grandchildren and a husband there. I learned to speak Yiddish during those 6 months. I thought though I had always understood it since I came from an immigrant family, I never could get a word of Yiddish out of my mouth. But I had to now in order to communicate with my aunt. From that emotional beginning of the book, I go back to the shtetl. The next chapters are about the good days and bad days, about romances and wars, hiding from the pogromists, Ukrainians and Russians and Bolsheviks, all who like to kill and rape Jews, about the death of my grandfather Gadol in a pogrom, and finally, starting a new life in America for everyone except Freda and her family. I want to read you now a sample of the first American years. They arrived after 3 years on the road, running across borders without papers, until finally HIAS, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, found them and took them under, my family, under their wings, and they were able to stay protected by the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society until the money came from their American relatives to pay for their passage on the boats. And here we are in America. Here's an example of the first American years. Young love in America. My mother, Florence, was the first to marry. She went to a dance of the High-Sinner Independent Young Men's Society, and there she met my father. She was a carefree teenager when she went to that dance. She loved the American movies and went with her friends every week. They knew all the words of the songs coming out of Tin Pan Alley. They bought silks and velvets on 4th Street, and I don't have to tell you where that is, but in the book it is described what 4th Street still is. They patronized immigrant dressmakers for a few dollars, who for a few dollars produced a dress or a suit just like the one the glamorous movie star wore in her latest movie. And these were new Americans. They were putting themselves into making themselves over again and trying to be American young people. They were working in factories. They managed to get by. And there was a very large extended family. My grandmother was the last of all of her siblings to get to America, and she had 5 sisters and 1 brother and all of their families. So she was taken in by a very loving family. There were many organizations, get back to it about this, my mother falling in love with my father. There were many organizations like the High-Sinner Independent Young Men's Society. The Landsmen, it's spelled L-A-N-D, like landsmen, but it's pronounced Landsmen in Yiddish because it's like the people who were together all the time in a group, in a self-help group, to help each other. It started out as a way, well, the Asians do it now. You help each other, raise them, get the loans that you need to go into a business. And often there were, in this case, they had dances all the time for the young people because they wanted, in the open society they found in America, their sons and daughters could fall in love with and marry people who were not Jewish, and they wanted their children to marry Jews, to bring Jewish grandchildren into their world. And that is why they had so many dance nights, and indeed my mother and father met in one of those dances of the High-Sinner Independent Young Men's Society.